One of the core concepts that we talk about in this channel is how stock markets and returns are driven by tail events. So you've heard me say so many times that you only need to be right in the stock market just a small percentage of the time. Some of the greatest investors you've ever heard of, billionaires, are right as low as 33% of the time, meaning that more than half the time they are wrong on their investments. And that, of course, is where risk management comes into play, because risk management helps you lose only a little bit when you're wrong and then make a lot when you're right. And this idea that tail events drive returns is always important to keep in the top of your mind, because in order to make money in the stock market, you need to really understand how it structurally works, which gets confusing because the standard financial idea is that the stock market returns 8 to 10% a year. So when you hear about that consistency, it kind of covers up the idea of those tail returns. But I'll show you in a second, tail returns are what cause the market to get that average of 8 to 10% per year. And what's interesting, just like with many other things relating to the stock market, this idea of tail events relates to just life in general too. And Morgan Housel had a great chapter about this concept in his book, The Psychology of Money. And to hammer this principle home, we're going to go over some of the examples from this chapter. First example is Heinz Berggren. I don't know, that's a tough German name, I can't say it right. But he fled Nazi Germany in 1936, and he studied literature at UC Berkeley and became an art dealer. And in 2000, he sold part of his massive collection of Picassos, Matisses, and all these other famous painters to the German government for more than 100 million euros. And that was an amazing bargain, basically a donation, because the private market value of that collection was over $1 billion. So the question is, how did he know which art pieces to collect? Because he had one of the greatest collections of all time, I guess. Well, the truth is, he didn't know which ones would take off, because a great art dealer like Heinz operates like an index fund. They buy everything they can. So they buy it as portfolios, not just individual pieces that they happen to like, and then they sit and wait for the few winners to emerge. So probably 99% of the paintings that Heinz bought, they probably didn't do anything. They were worth nothing by the end of it. But that didn't matter if that other 1% turned out to be the work of someone like Picasso, right? So Heinz could be wrong most of the time and still end up so rich. So this is not to say that Heinz was an idiot and just got lucky, right? He's probably pretty good at collecting art. But even someone good like Heinz, 99% of his paintings weren't worth anything at the end. But that 1% made up for everything else. Here's a quote from Brad Pitt when he accepted his Screen Actors Guild Award. He said, "I've been banging away at this thing for 30 years, and I think the simple math is some projects work and some don't. There's no reason to belabor either one, just get on to the next one." And we know Brad Pitt has been in a lot of films, and a lot of them are not that good, but a few of them, pretty great. Another example is Tom Cruise. He has been in so many movies, and so many different types of movies too. Some are just horrible, and then some are like the new Top Gun, just amazing. So even for these movie stars, only some of those movies work out. See, a lot of things in business and investing work this way. The long tails, which are the farthest ends of a distribution of outcomes, they have tremendous influence in finance, where a small number of events can account for the majority of outcomes. Here's another good story about Walt Disney. His Steamboat Willie cartoon put him on the map as an animator. But as far as his actual business, it was terrible. Disney's first studio went bankrupt. His films were super expensive to produce and financed at outrageous terms. So by the mid-1930s, Disney had produced more than 400 cartoons. Most of them were short and everyone loved them, but most of them lost a fortune. But then Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs came out and changed everything. The $8 million it earned in the first 6 months of 1938 was an order of magnitude higher than anything the company earned previously. It absolutely transformed Disney Studios. They paid off all their debt, all their employees got bonuses, they purchased a new state-of-the-art studio in Burbank, and Walt Disney got an Oscar, which turned him into a full-blown celebrity. And by that point in 1938, he had produced several hundred hours of film. But in terms of business and what actually worked, only the 83 minutes of Snow White were what mattered. So you gotta remember, anything that is huge, profitable, famous, or influential is the result of a tail event. It's an outlying one in thousands or millions event. And most of our attention goes to these events, right? So we forget how rare and powerful they really are. And they are not common either. We just hear about the ones that succeed. So it skews your mental idea of how it happens and how often it happens. Another place where you see this is in venture capital, right? We know the success rate is very low there. So they actually did a study of more than 21,000 venture financings from 2004 to 2014. 65% lost money. 2.5% made 10 to 20x. 1% made more than 20x return, and then 0.5%, so about 100 companies out of 21,000 earned 50x or more. And that's where the majority of the industry's returns come from. The big winners that are extremely rare. Now, of course, we all know venture capital, that's how it works, right? But guess what? It's kind of the same thing in the stock market. So if you take an index like the Russell 3000. Well, 40% of the stock components in there lost 70% of their value, and they never recovered. And we're talking about since 1980 here. So effectively, all of the index's returns came from 7% of its companies, because those are the companies that outperform by at least 2 standard deviations. Most companies fail, and they're not even bad companies. They had to have some level of success to even go public and be included in the index. But even then, their lifespans are measured in years and not generations. It's very rare to have a company, say like Ford, that's been around for like 150 years. It's crazy, really. And wait, I think it's less than 150, I forgot, but it's around 100. There are a lot of failures. This is why picking stocks is hard. And actually, picking stocks in the beginning might be easy, but then knowing what to do with them long term is the difficult part. That's why we always talk about trade management too, right? Because you really don't know which ones are going to survive. Carolco is an example of a company everyone thought was awesome. It produced some of the biggest films in the 1980s and 90s, including the first 3 Rambo films, Terminator 2, Basic Instinct, and Total Recall. All huge movies. So they went public in 1987 and were a part of the Russell 3000, and they were a huge success, churning out hit after hit. They did $500 million in revenue in 91, and they had a market cap of $400 million. Huge money back then, especially for a film studio. And then they completely failed. They stopped making great movies and everything fell apart, and they went bankrupt in 1996. So that huge stock and that huge company went to zero, and that is a catastrophic loss. But the reality is that 4 in 10 public companies experience that over time. And these aren't companies that just do worse over time, but these are companies that completely disappear. That's just how it goes. That's how tail ends work. But if you look at it, the Russell 3000 has increased more than 73-fold since 1980. That's an amazing return, even though 40% of the companies in the index were failures. But that 7% that actually performed well enough to offset all those duds. This even happens in individual companies like Amazon. In 2018, they drove 6% of the S&P's returns. But their growth as a company is almost entirely due to Prime and Amazon Web Services. And you know those are tail events because, you know, they had some stupid stuff like Fire phones and travel agencies. But the only thing that really worked are Prime and Amazon Web Services. And this was originally a bookseller, right? What are they doing with web services? I mean, it makes sense now, but these are the kind of tail events. Apple was responsible for almost 7% of the index's return in 2018, and that was driven overwhelmingly by the iPhone, another tail event. And the thing is, the best people in the business know how these outcomes are distributed, and they adjust their strategy to fit with that. Because if you try to go against what's happening, you're going to get steamrolled. So after Bezos and Amazon released that Fire phone, you know what he said? He said, if you think that's a big failure, we're working on much bigger failures right now. I am not kidding. Some of them are going to make the Fire phone look like a tiny little blip. And that's because Bezos knows he has to go for those tail products, because a few of them are going to absolutely take off and bring the company into the new decade. Netflix CEO Reed Hastings once announced his company was canceling several big budget productions, and his reasoning was that their hit ratio is way too high. He said, I'm always pushing the content team. We have to take more risk. You have to try more crazy things because we should have a higher cancel rate overall. Once again, going for that tail event. You can think about comedians. When you see their special on Netflix, like stand-up comedians, you're seeing the best stuff. You're basically seeing those tail event jokes. Because to write, say, those 50 jokes for the special, they had to try out thousands of jokes for at least a year out in the clubs. And honestly, the yearly special that a lot of comedians do now, they're not as good as they used to be, because the best comedy specials took years and years to make. So a lot of comedians, like say Kevin Hart, Russell Peters, their first specials are the best specials, because those jokes that are coming out in those first specials, that's like 10 years worth of work. And then after that, you get famous, so you churn out one every year, but it's just never as good. And that's not because these comedians aren't good, they're the best, right? That just shows you how long it takes to get good material. And even for the best, it takes years and years. And that's why Seinfeld is still doing his same jokes from 1980. You know he has a new big budget Netflix movie coming out, right? It's the story of Pop-Tarts, set in Battle Creek, Michigan. This man has been talking about Pop-Tarts for like 4 decades. But that's how it works. It's tough to get winners, and Seinfeld knows once you have a winner, you want to hold on to it. I actually have a signed copy of his most recent book where he has all his years and years worth of jokes. But going back to finance, think about someone like Warren Buffett. He said he's owned 400 to 500 stocks during his lifetime and made most of his money on just 10 of them. Charlie Munger followed up and he said if you remove just a few of Berkshire's top investments, its long-term track record is pretty average, actually. So you really got to think about what activities and what areas in life are driven by these tail events. Because when you understand that tail events drive it, then you're not going to feel so bad about all the failures you're going to experience along the way. And that's going to motivate you to keep going to experience that tail event, because that's what's going to drive everything. That's why why we talk about how important it is to have risk management so you could stay in the game. Because if you get knocked out of the game, then you actually lose. But all the little failures along the way, that's not losing. Like George Soros said, it's not whether you're right or wrong that's important, but how much money you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong. That is how you account for tail events and why you need your risk management in place. Now, there's also a downside of tail events that we didn't even talk about, but we did talk about it in this video right here, because it's very important when we're dealing with tail events to avoid the worst tail events as well. So click this video right here and I will explain it there.